released a letter saying the president is inclined to declassify that Democratic committee memo and will work with the House Intelligence Committee to see if they can come up with a releasable version of it, much redacted. But that is not the only breaking news tonight. There's a lot more. The Russia story has suddenly become an FBI story, and it's moving faster than anyone anticipated. Just a year ago, all the smart people were mocking Donald Trump for being insane enough to suggest the Obama administration had surveilled, or as he put it, wiretapped his campaign. What a paranoid lunatic, they said. Get off Twitter. Yeah. Now we know what actually happened. The question at this point is, how many people in Trump's orbit weren't spied on by the FBI? Trump advisor Carter Page was placed under government surveillance in the fall of 2016 after the feds used uncorroborated claims from the Trump dossier to justify a FISA warrant. We know from congressional testimony that Page spoke with Trump advisor, Trump campaign manager, Steve Bannon, while he was being spied on, meaning that Bannon was likely spied on too. Tonight, based on our own reporting, we can tell you that Carter Page also sent email messages to members of the Trump campaign during that same period. Presumably, the FBI intercepted those as well. Suddenly, it looks like the Obama administration may have spied on a significant portion of the Trump campaign team. Just how many people were surveilled and to what extent? How much did President Obama know about it? We still don't have the answers to those questions, though we definitely have the right to them. Oh, no, we don't, say Democrats. Asking questions is a sign of disloyalty to this country. The very people who once told us that spying absolutely never happened are now telling us the spying was perfectly justified and normal. Why? Because Russia. Okay, but the funny thing is, almost all of the Russian collusion evidence unearthed recently implicates Democrats, not the Trump campaign. Yesterday, we learned that, for example, Senator Mark Warner of Virginia was secretly sending text messages to a lobbyist for a Russian oligarch in the hope of making contact with the dossier author, Christopher Steele. Warner tried to hide that correspondence. I'd, quote, rather not have a paper trail, he texted to the oligarch's lobbyist. Now, traditionally, in Washington anyway, no paper trail is not an indicator of transparency. In fact, it's a sign of wrongdoing. Now, we're not saying that Senator Warner ought to resign his seat and face treason charges, and we're not saying that because we're not hysterical liberals willing to poison our international relations and misuse the justice system just for cheap political ends. But we do think that Warner's behavior is worth knowing more about. And so, by the way, is a remarkable new New York Times story just published about 40 minutes ago. That story alleges that within the last year, American intelligence agencies paid a spy, apparently a spy working for the Russian government, $100,000 in American tax dollars in exchange for unverified and possibly fabricated information about President Trump. Now, why would our intelligence agencies use our money to do something like that? Why would they do anything like that under any circumstances? And by the way, what was the information they gathered used for? None of that is clear at this hour. Here's what is clear right now, the bottom line and what we've learned this whole week, the one thing worth taking away from a dramatic week in Washington, it's this. The Obama administration spied on a rival political campaign. There had better be a legitimate reason for doing that, but increasingly it looks like there wasn't. Fox Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry joins us with more on that Russia intel story. Ed?
Well, Tucker, this is just breaking this hour. The New York Times reporting that a shadowy Russian tricked American spies, actually, out of $100,000 last year. They promised not just information on Donald Trump, but to deliver stolen National Security Agency cyber weapons in a deal that this shadowy Russian insisted would also include, yes, compromising material on the president. Sounds like a spy novel. The NSA has been devastated by losing these secret hacking tools. So they delivered the cash in a suitcase to a Berlin hotel room in September. Supposed to be the first installment of $1 million payout. Here's the kicker. The Russian claimed the information would link the president and his associates to Russia. But instead of providing the hacking tools, the Russian produced unverified and possibly fabricated information involving Mr. Trump and others. Bank records, emails, purported Russian intelligence data. Sounds a little bit like the Steele dossier. Several U.S. intel officials tell us tonight they made clear they did not want the Trump material from the Russian. They're insisting they never wanted this. He was suspected of having murky ties to Russian intel and to Eastern European cyber criminals. That's what they tell the New York Times. But it sounds like U.S. intel officials are kind of spinning after the fact because they were in negotiations. The NSA even used its official Twitter account nearly a dozen times to send out coded messages to this Russian. The Russians' eagerness to sell the Trump dirt raised suspicion among American spies because it was part of an operation to feed the information out into the United States intelligence community and pit U.S. intel officials against Mr. Trump. It was confusing because at one point this Russian dropped his asking price from about $10 million to just over $1 million. That raised alarm bells. Then he showed a 15-second clip of a video showing a man in a room talking to two women. He claimed it was Mr. Trump, but there was really no way to confirm that it was Mr. Trump with two women. It was a grainy video. It had no audio. And we're told that these officials were shown the video in the Russian embassy in Berlin. So this does sound like a spy novel. And as you were just saying, the president some time ago was suggesting that some U.S. intel officials were out to get him. People said this is crazy, that wouldn't happen. But now the Times is reporting tonight a remarkable story suggesting that they were willing to pay $1 million to potentially get dirt on the president, U.S. intelligence officials. They gave $100,000, the first installment, and the shadowy Russian took the money, went away without any dirt on the president. Tucker?
Pretty unbelievable.
Wow.
Actually, shocking. Very badly written story, but you, I thought, summarized it very well. Philippe Reines was a longtime advisor to Hillary Clinton, was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under Obama, and he joins us tonight. Philippe, thanks for coming on.
No, thank you.
So I just got to ask you what you I mean, to the extent you know about the story that just broke, but the bottom line is our intelligence community paid $100,000 to apparently a Russian agent for salacious information of a sexual nature, unverified, likely false, about President Trump. That doesn't seem standard.
Well, you know what? I think it's a couple of things. And why it does sound like a spy novel, unfortunately, it's nonfiction. It's what we're living through. I think the intelligence agencies often have to pay people who are not great to get information. We paid $8 million to find out who the worst spy in FBI history was, Robert Hansen. I think we paid $25 million to locate Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, just by the nature of it.
For sure, and I'm glad that we did. That's all.
I'm glad too.
But that was an exchange.
But I think this is an example of it working, because I don't know when this is from, but you know what? You haven't heard about it, and that's because it was debunked, exactly as Ed was saying.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess look, there's a lot that we don't know, and so I don't want to presume anything ever. But the bottom line is our government paid $100,000 of our money to buy fake salacious material about the president. What would be the national security reason for doing that?
I think the bottom line is that the president's campaign was stocked with people, starting with Carter Page, who, by the way, was under FBI surveillance going back to 2013. Nothing to do with the president's campaign. His contacts warranted multiple surveillance warrants, starting in October of 2016, 4 more times. And mind you, do the math, 4 more times takes you into the Trump administration.
I'm aware of that. And you, like a lot of people who've abandoned concerns about civil liberties, are assuming that because someone is under surveillance, he's done something wrong. Whereas I would argue that the onus is on the government to explain why you're spying on Americans.
I think most people agree with you. I certainly agree with you. And the FISA court has a very high bar.
But no, it actually doesn't. And we know that because almost no applications for FISA warrants are ever turned down.
But there are very few ever made, because everyone knows how
the ratio
they are.
Okay, this is chicken and the egg. But the truth is they're almost never turned down. And we know that in this case, the dossier was the backbone of the request. It was the first thing in the request. We do know that. And we know that the dossier, by the FBI's own description, was a flaky document whose contents they could not verify. So look, here's the bottom line. Does it bother you if I said during the Obama administration that the Bush administration, during the campaign, had spied on a bunch of members of Obama's campaign team?
Not if they were suspected Russian agents.
But what if a year and a half later there was no evidence that they were Russian agents?
Well,
and this spying, I mean, would you say, well, geez, it better be a pretty, before you spy on a rival political campaign using the FBI, you better be sure you've got good reason.
Here's an interesting argument. Is Carter Page part of the Trump campaign or not? Because you'd make it sound like he was the running mate, except when it comes to his contacts.
It anything to do with the Trump campaign.
So it's not looking at the Trump campaign.
No, but here's the point. They were using him. Look, Carter Page, this show exclusively learned today, emailed a number of people on the Trump campaign.
It's called surveillance.
Okay, right? And so if you're surveilling Carter Page, who never got paid, he says he never met Trump. Trump says he never met him. whatever. I wasn't there, but that's what we know about it. I don't think he was integral to the campaign, but he had contact with people on the campaign, and all of his conversations, both written and verbal, were being surveilled by the federal government.
That's what surveillance is, to see
Right.
the totality of what you're doing. He's probably talking to his dentist, too.
The Obama administration is spying on the Trump campaign.
No,
and
they're not. They
literally were.
The Obama administration, thankfully, took this very seriously. They went and got a warrant on someone. The warrant was based on George Papadopoulos. The dossier was part of the warrant, but the warrant was primarily put.
That's not true. That's not true. But look, the point is, I'm just saying, let's be totally honest here. The Obama administration spying on the Trump campaign, maybe there's an awesome reason for it. No one has explained that yet. But you assume that it's totally fine. You would not assume it was totally fine if it was flipped around, would you?
I would assume. I happen to trust our government. I know that these days that's not a very savvy thing to say, but
I've
I trust
our government.
I trust it whether it's President Bush or President Obama. And FISA started in earnest after 9/11, and I think we all learned that it was important. And if American citizens are in some way acting as a foreign agent, then they're fair game. I'm sorry, they're fair game.
But you have to prove that they are, and they didn't. And by the way, there's no reason, based on everything we've learned in the past couple of weeks, to have childlike faith in our intelligence agencies, and I don't think it's a good idea.
But bear in mind with Carter Page that it was renewed every 90 days 3 times. But it was renewed based on what happened in those 90-day periods.
Let's see the applications, and I think.
Well, I'm happy for that.
Would say,
unfortunately,
yeah,
I don't control it.
I don't either. Philippe, thank you.
No, thank you, Tucker.